Hello, my name is Nzadnilbad, and I'm a solo developer who's been working on Magenta Horizon for almost 4 years. Recently, I've updated a huge content pack called Drenched in Gold, which consists of the first half of Act 3. There is still a long way to go to properly finish the 1.0 version of this game, but I wanted to take a moment and make a postmortem/devlog kind of video to reflect what I've been through with the lengthy development process and to explain to people what I had in mind when I designed the elements in the game. I wouldn't say my developer philosophy contains some kind of enlightenment or useful theories to use in your dev project, but I always wanted to ramble about it in a video essay manner. So let's get started. Firstly, I would like to share how I even thought about starting this big project. Just like 90% of indie developers out there, I was miserable, as my main job wasn't satisfying at all and my side projects were ruined by a chain of misfortunes and my terrible choices. Chaotic overthinking was devouring my life, and my failure as a game developer cast a shadow over my confidence. One good thing about being an artist is that there is a way to express negative emotions via mediums, and it can be a catalyst for personal growth or even a pride of conqueror. At that moment, I wanted to express the feeling of navigating through the uncertainty, organizing chaotic situations with improvised methods, and the frantic flow of my train of thought. I had to do it all alone because only I could make this work to be true. Only I would take the burden of work, and only I wanted to conquer it. The world was set in the afterlife. It's a good place to start the concept work since I love purple, and the purple spectrum has some connotation with death in many cultures. Also, there is an excuse to draw tons of grotesque monstrosity, my go-to drawing subject. Personally, I'm not spiritual at all, but the afterlife setting can be a canvas for the world of aimless chaos, especially if the world after death is only a purgatory full of demons and no heaven or hell exists. It's a story about a little reaper from a human-led soul sanctuary, and she has to find the meaning of her existence in this barren land. Even though in a literal sense, I didn't suffer as much as the protagonist of this scenario, I tried to reflect on my own experience in the story about tidying up the uncertainty and overcoming the odds. Also, I wanted this setting to be expressed via my favorite genre of video game, for now. Beat 'em up/combo action games. Not many games can provide the feeling of conquering and mastering hectic situations like Devil May Cry series or 3D Ninja Gaiden series do. In that kind of game, enemies come from below to rip and tear you apart. At first, you will feel panic. The erratic movement of foes doesn't make sense at all, and your options are too broad and vague to fully utilize. But you get a grip one by one. Each erratic chess piece reveals its pattern, and you start to punish them accordingly. And then you start to play with them, making your own comfort zone in the most stressful situation. Failures will be there, but that's okay, you still learn from it. After all that, the mountains of enemies are no more, chaos has come down, and the game pats your back with a good score. That's the feeling of conquering I wanted to capture. Even though my dream was high, I had to make some compromises when I started development. 1. I can't do jack shit about 3D modeling, so my work will be entirely oriented in 2D work. It had a lot of references too. 2. Even though it will be a combo action game, I'm not gonna be able to make something like DMC 4 or 5 where the enemies are canvas and you can paint almost all kinds of pictures you want. Mainly because I'm just unable to pull off that high-end freeform gameplay when I play those kinds of games. But also, it will be impossible for me to make all the intricate moves and animations by myself, so I should find other strengths to focus on. 3. I'm not a good programmer, and I require several YouTube tutorials to make even the most basic functions in games. My game should be functional with simple structures, a bunch of if-else statements, no saving during the gameplay, primitive enemy AI, and projectiles that don't work well on different geometry types, stuff like that. With this in mind, I started working on my project. My goal was to make a good conversion game, but back then, my idea of what should be the main focus wasn't fully formed. However, there was a general structure of the game I had in mind, even at the beginning. I set up my game's general structure or progression even before establishing what players or enemies could do in my game, because I want to make sure that my game is a focused linear action game, while also being distinguishable from the modern formula. 1. The stage selection and the difficulty change should be easily approachable. One of my complaints when I played older action games for study purposes was that even if you wanted to go back to your favorite stages, you had to play the game all over again. That aspect is applied to boss fight rematches too, especially in Souls-likes. While I could see their benefit to make players feel like they are going through an irreversible journey, but that's probably not suitable for a game focused on mastery of combat and combat experimentation. Also, can we just agree that locking the highest difficulty behind several playthroughs is stupid? Some players might have studied the game from elsewhere and are ready to dive into the hardest difficulty right away. Some players can't just see the value of the game on the normal difficulty and might undermine the game as a result. Some might have spent 100 hours on the game but the save file is corrupted. There are tons of reasons why games' difficulty options should be open from the start. You may think that would lead clueless players to try out the hardest difficulty from the start and get burnt by it. But hell if I care. It's the hardest difficulty and they should know their fucking place. 2. Boomer shooter layouts. What I meant by that is that I wanted to implement non-linear path, uncertain enemy placements, and of course, color keys. You may think the straight corridor structure with no additional clutter is the best for action games, as it makes you focus on pure combat without any busy time wasters. And I agree with that, most of the time. But here's the thing about my game's limitations. Other than combat arenas, it will likely feature a lot of other elements to make certain stages more memorable than the others. I wouldn't be able to pull off Bayonetta's set pieces, the wonderful 1-on-one's constant minigames and those weird combat situations, or just anything that can take your headspace when you're not doing the combat activities, excluding stories of course. I truly believe that my non-linear level design worked well as a side dish element, largely because there are moments of second guessing whenever you are going through the stages for the first time. And there's also a window to make an optimization when you're routing for triple S rank. I think Act 1 didn't show the strengths enough, mainly because I was still figuring out how to make key huntings and navigations more interesting. But I'm confident that Act 2's stage design is generally an improvement, as it included the classic Doom teleportation mechanic and more densely packed mazes. But I know the level navigation is a chore at best even for some veteran players, so I implemented the level navigation helpers too. This is a structure I can allow some people to bypass without me saying, "Fuck you and don't you ever play my game!" And we are now back to 3. Minimal upgrades. All the melee moveset and movement options like Rush, iframe dash, and double jump will be available from the start. Range skills will be easily purchasable from the list and freely adjustable from your magazines. All the extra set adjustments will be made with a simple charm system, which is proven in Hollow Knight to be a good mechanic for tinkering with your playstyle while not heavily relying on Excel sheet gaming. It also works well as a collectibles in stages. Now, some may think that opening up all the melee attack options is not a good idea because it is overwhelming for newcomers. But here's the thing about the trap of unlock mechanics. Unless the game is something like Ninja Gaiden where upgrades are part of the long-term decision making, most games' movement unlocks are needlessly limiting for returning players or veterans who can easily understand what the game wants them to do. I would say that more than half of Metroidvanias I've played would benefit from just allowing some of the unlockable tools from the beginning so that players don't have to suffer a slow start. And it's even worse when it's combined with skill trees, something that should grant interesting branching choices but instead needlessly blocks certain skills behind certain paths so that you are forced to level up unwanted stuff just to get one benefit. I didn't want my game to work like that, so here's what I did. All melees are available from the start, but the move list will also be present in the menu, and you will get a small information step by step from the tutorial messages spread out in Act 1. Some players can get information earlier even without watching certain tutorials, and it's a good thing in my book. After all, half of this game is all about experimenting with the combat tools at the player's pace, and I wouldn't mind about players having different learning experiences because of it. It fits well with the narrative of Gretel too. She is a veteran reaper who woke up from 200 years of slumber. Of course she knows every technique she learned before, but now it requires several practices to carve them back into the stiffened muscles. This juxtaposes with the players who have to learn the techniques that are available from the start. It's a thing I didn't intend when I wrote the story, but it makes sense, I think. Now that we mentioned Gretel, we can jump on to more interesting part. Her. Usually, my method of designing a game character can differ on case-by-case basis. Some characters are initially designed with only aesthetics in mind, and I would add a fitting game mechanics built around the character later. The opposite can also happen, where I think about the in-game function first, and then design the external elements accordingly. Gretel is a mixture of both. The character base started as the first category, but the additional features added to her are firmly in the second category. When I designed the character, one of my focuses was trying to make a classical Grim Reaper character, but something more unique than just a skeleton in a robe. Inspired by the Sky Burial practice, I decided to implement the bird theme for my character, with the visual of bird skeletons and the bird talon functioning as a scythe. I experimented with the ideas and the shape was formed. Fittingly, the movement was designed to be very floaty and easily adjustable during the aerial movement. Double jump and aerial dash were just given at the point too. Since her symbolic animal is an owl, I tried to convey that snatcher-like attacks in her attack toolset. One of them is Flying Bee, which is kinda like an owl gliding down and then snatching prey away. The other is a signature pull attack, which is again kinda like a raptor catching prey and thrashing. These two attacks became important options later on, but at the time, these two existed for the thematical consistency and nothing more. To show how meaningless these options previously were, normal pogoing was always preferable to Flying Bee because players could do better aerial control with it. And the pull attack was simply a consecutive action of normal attack plus iframe dash. Later on, I added the pull attack trajectory manipulation and Flying Bee knockoff effect to find more usefulness in them, but I knew I had to do more than that to make my game fit into the traditional action game category. But I wasn't sure how to expand the meaningful moveset while maintaining the thematical consistency other than gimmicky stuff. This is where the second design method kicks in. Rather than just trying to fit Gretel into an owl-shaped mold, I tried to implement a lot of interesting tools from the other games I enjoyed. My line of thought was that Gretel is already visually and narratively strong, and she is conceptually a skilled warrior, not an amateur, so there's no way the melting pot style of combat system would hurt the character. Let's talk about different games for a moment. Life Leech is probably one of the best healing systems invented in the action game scene, done by none other than Neo. Basically, you toss a charm to an enemy and then smack them to spawn the healing orbs. Then the orbs will get absorbed and will heal the wounds. This is great because it makes the healing activity more dynamic than the traditional method of backing off and using an item, which is the basic way to heal in Neo. Kinda shame. The main point is you have to constantly engage in combat to heal yourself. The more skillful you are, the more you will get benefits from it, which leads to satisfying feedback for players, as the active interaction matters in an extrinsic manner. Also, because of its buff-based structure, it can have multiple purposes other than just healing the lost health, like a damage prevention method when you are trying to push more towards the enemy in the full health state. I wanted the players to continuously engage in the combat, so I took the light leech from Neo and put it in my game. Of course, I couldn't just copy and paste the exact system, so I made some twists on this formula. The first twist is, I turned the charm into a grenade form. In this way, not only does your aiming matter more, but also the targets matter now, since the grenade can impact multiple enemies all at once. Not only that, each enemy has different values of healing orb, and some can just cancel the healing buff as a response, so there are even more things to consider when you're making a quick decision. Another twist is that I made the healing system completely regenerative with the successful melee attacks. While the set amount of healing can make a tense moment on its own, it has its own limit. Mainly, it gets contextualized as a limited resource, so players will be naturally reluctant to use it for more than just a strict healing purpose. But as I said about the functionality of Light Leech before, I like the multiple purposes in one given system, and I wanted players to find its value more easily, so I had to make sure that players feel safe about tossing the grenade in any time, as long as they are fully engaging in the combat. There is also another benefit of the regenerative method, and it's the table's turn movement it can create. Imagine this, you are fighting a really hard boss, you are almost dead, the boss just hit the final phase, and you have 0 healing chances left. And this can happen if you're determined enough. Cool moment, isn't it? The third and the last twist is that the healing grenade also regenerates the focus meter, or some say the mana bar. In this game, there will be a lot of moments where you need to use the range skills, as there are just a lot of enemies in an arena. Here's where the healing grenade shines, as the healing orbs also regain the focus meter. Using this momentum, you can unleash the chains of deadly range skills and proactively make your safe spot. It's like how the Devil Trigger works in the DMC series, but more tactical than pressing one button in a given situation. With all those twists I implemented, Healing Grenade became the core part of the game, and it's one of the few design elements I can proudly talk about without feeling ashamed about it. Now that I mentioned range skills, let's talk about Nero from DMC5 and Sekiro for a moment. One thing I liked about their shared character concept is that they have only one melee weapon with a focused combat method, but there are plenty of sub-weapons that supplement different playstyles. This struck me as a fine balance of not overworking with the character to have multiple weapons but also catching the playstyle variety. However, there are some things I didn't like about how those two examples work. While I understand the developer's focus to make Nero a distinguishable character, the breakable weapon is a questionable choice as the arm preparation work felt like busy work at best, and the Q slot felt too rigid for a game that sells fluid attack combinations as its main appeal. Sekiro has other problems. The ammo for the prosthetic arm being a spirit emblem that costs money didn't make me want to use tools at all, other than the firecracker for a jail-free card. After dealing with the boss rush mode, I could appreciate the utility of certain prosthetic tools for the optimizations, but you have to admit that the anxiety about not being able to use certain tools because of non-regenerative resources can be disheartening, especially in action games.
This is why Wulong's system is better.
So my implementation for this concept was one Scythe, 4 sub-weapons you can switch anytime, and the focus meter that regenerates with each melee hit, just like how the healing grenade works. However, this wasn't enough. While having a ranged option itself is a good start, it had to be more unique, more fitting to the expressive combat. so I was rolling my noggin to figure out the problem. And then, the big shot appeared. When I was early in the development, Ultra Kill was launched as an early access. Compared to the current state of Ultra Kill, it was emptier back then, but it showed a core value enough to inspire me. The weapons reach combo. I thought it was cool to have chain reactions of different ranged weapons, so I decided to put it in my game without a single hesitation. Hesitation is defeat, after all. It started with small interactions like the chain bombing inspired by the coin ricochet, then a cute interaction like this helicopter combo, and so on. However, there was a problem. There was only one focus meter, meaning that the player couldn't find a lot of opportunities to experiment with the range skills. Each skill has a different cost, and if you used the cost-heavy one more than once, you couldn't just use the other skill because the focus meter was empty. There's another unexpected reference that came here to solve the conundrum. Alien Soldier, a Sega arcade boss rush game with a cult following. I admit that I haven't delved into the game more so than the other game references, but there was an interesting mechanic to be observed. You can customize the 4 weapon slots to have any kind of ranged weapons, and each slot has its unique bullet capacity. When you deplete a certain ranged weapon, you can just switch to another weapon with full ammo, and the unselected one will regenerate the ammo in the background. This bullet management aspect synergized with the speedy flow where you have to juggle the different weapons and the character state to demolish the bosses in a short span of time. I thought it was a neat idea, but instead of straight up copying the mechanic, I added more twist to it. In my game, instead of the unselected ranged options, the selected one will get the most benefit from the focus bar regeneration. This means you have to constantly switch different skills even if you're not using them if you're setting up for a ranged combo. It adds a subtle complexity to the combat flow, which is a thing you have to learn if you want to go for the optimization game. The more you get good at it, you will see how it can effectively dissolve the hordes of enemies with the chain of deadly ranged combos. Overall, I think the general structure of the ranged combat management system turned out to be good, but I want to talk more about some unique range skills and how I decided to make them. Shock Shield and Gem Shredder are parry-based range skills, where you have to use the tool in front of the danger zone or a weapon collision. Shock Shield shoots a massive blast that deals massive poise damage to every type of enemy, and Gem Shredder relocates your position upon the collision, something akin to the Mist Raven from Sekiro. These two parries are designed as my answers for the parry-centric game design. One button parry mechanic with a nice clang sound is the new black of the modern game design. With well-timed input, you can negate the attack at a close distance and maintain your position, but the mistimed input can damage or kill you. It's a simple but satisfying risk and reward system. I can deny that I love parrying in action games. However, there were sacrifices to be made. The universal parry mechanic became the dominant strategy as a defensive option, so the spacing game between you and the enemy rarely mattered. What's the point of calculating the distance between you and the enemy when you can negate the problem by simply doing a timing game right in front of the enemy? Magenta Horizon is supposed to be a game where your movement tools are versatile and you have to fully utilize them, so I should have to disincentivize players from standing passively. The middle ground I found was making those parry tools follow the flowchart of the range skill system. The cost is heavier than the other ranged skills, so you can't just abuse the skill anytime. However, the gain you get from the successful parry is massive. You get more healing wars with the electrical zap, perfect timing grants the biggest AoE you can create, and you can stop the steam locomotive. So I caught 2 birds with 1 stone. The thrill of parrying and the non-parry reliant structure. However, there was even more use for those tools, something that wasn't intentional at the start, but I implemented anyway because it just harmonizes well with the combat style. You can parry your attack. If you can't just wait for the enemies to attack you, you can set up the situation, like setting up the boomerangs, setting up the fountains, or hell, setting up both of them combined. Not only does this allow you to use the offensive capability of the parry tools without relying on the incoming attack, but also it can be a consistent way to pull off the perfect parry. It's a utility that you can't easily find in the conventional parry system. While we are talking about the parry skills, I would like to mention another player toolset that can work as both defensive and offensive tool. And it's not even a range skill, it's a thing you can use from the start. But before we delve into that, it's time to talk about Ninja Gaiden. The game is chock full of non-conventional action game formulas, including this fucking ridiculous arena. But my favorite of them would be the ultimate technique, aka the charge attack. You hold the strong attack button, and then fully charged attack will unleash the deadly combo. The longer you hold, the lengthier and deadlier it gets. This mechanic works as a generalist crowd control tool and your defensive method, as it makes you invincible. Once again, it's a mechanic that has multiple purposes. But there's more than that. When you're falling from above, press the button at the on-landing animation and your startup animation gets skipped. This little execution challenge is fun to do as it is, but it also gives more opportunity to quickly charge up the attack safely in the chaotic battle. There's a good flow state of weaving the on-landing charge attack at the end of area attack too. You may say this is a simple timing game, but there are considerations to make, like the height of the jump, the falling speed, and the distance to the target, which makes this a more interesting execution challenge than a one-button parry. Now, there are more nuances to this mechanic, like if there are fallen SSs on the ground, you can charge the attack much faster by absorbing it, so you can do the chain of ultimate techniques, but I just took the on-landing charge part of the whole mechanic, and I added one more decision-making process during that charge-up animation. You can adjust the attack direction. Normally, you can just do the frontal charge attack as a go-to method of damage dealing, but you can also counter the aerial enemies with the upper charge attack, or you can just back off from the danger by doing the backward charge attack. Remind you that you can use these attack options for completely different reasons, and they are all gonna be valid as long as they work out. This branching movement favors the improvisational combat flow, which means every player's flowchart won't always be the same even if you land in the same situation where you have to use the charge attack. Considering the crowd control is the alpha and omega of this game, this kind of fluidity is what I must have implemented for the better good. Here's the thing though. As much as I wanted to make Gretel a one-woman armory, I always had to follow one design rule. Every attack distance and angle will be consistent. This means the charge attack won't magically fling Gretel towards the target beyond the fixed distance. The juggling combo requires a better positioning relative to the opponent because it will magnetize Gretel to the target, and all the ranged attack combo requires precise spacing to make them happen. You may think this is a rigid approach for a game that's supposed to feel good about hitting the target, but as a designer, I wanted to respect the knowledge of players. Players should be able to internalize the strength and limit of each moveset, and I think the movement distance is also an attribute for each moveset in an action game that emphasizes spacing. If there is a weapon in an action game that deals damage of a random number between 5 and 10 with each hit, it would make a lot of players scratch their heads, unless they are ARPG fans. The same logic applies to the movement distance. If the movement distance and angle change depending on the context that are easily conceivable by the players, they would be confused even if that movement adjustment can favor the player. At worst, they wouldn't even bother about the attack distance at all because their joystick inputs would feel meaningless. What I'm saying here is basically, I didn't want to make an Arkham action game, and I tried to stay far away from that design approach. So I've talked enough about the player character. I'm proud of what I achieved so far with the 4 years of non-stop tinkering, but I knew in my mind that there's no way I could achieve something remarkable with the character alone. As I said before, Gretel's combat maneuvers are intentionally downscaled to the one weapon system because there's a physical limit of what I can do with this character. Not that I'm saying you can't make a cool combo with one weapon only. Vernal Edge comes to my mind as an example, but here's the thing. That game has tons of additional skills and much snappier movement tools that can be utilized for lengthy combo extenders. The game thrives on expressive combo maneuvers, and the combo videos made by the fans shows the fruits of labor pretty well. On the other hand, here's what I can do with the punching bag in the training room. Sadly, this is my best attempt. Not the most interesting thing to see in a vacuum, isn't it? So my development focus has shifted to the utility aspect, the reason why the players have to use the diverse tools, the friction, the yang to the yin. It's time to talk about the enemies, easily my favorite thing to develop in this game. Even at the beginning, when every idea felt vague, I had a gameplay scenery in mind, a protagonist shredding through hordes of aggressive demons that filled the whole screen, a carnage in a literal pandemonium. Well, basically, I'm just talking about the Doom cover art. But yeah, I wanted to make an action game in which nobody would complain about enemy variety and enemy density. Whenever I played action games for a study purpose, my common annoyance were mostly about the lack of variety and lack of density of the enemies, even if the fundamental combat system felt good to play. Maybe I can give some slack for the lack of variety because I know it is pain in the ass to craft a whole model, animation, and AI tree for new enemies that would die in few hits. But I have no idea why so many developers are so reluctant with adding more enemies or mixing the enemies in a given encounter. This is not just applicable to small developers. This applies to the big devs too. The underappreciated aspect of multi-enemy fights is that they can breed dynamic combat situations much easier than just relying on a solo, pattern-heavy enemy. To give an example, here's a hard mode exclusive arena in the Great Train Robbery stage. There are multiple types of enemies here. Truck Demon controls the ground with the shield. King Propeller covers the middle height of the arena, and plenty of small propeller demons roam around free. Both give contact damage, so you have to be mindful. Of course, they were not enough, so I added more enemy types, as you can see here. Since the space is cramped, you have to think about your position relative to your opponents, your optimal target in a given situation, and your optimal attack methods. There are some windows to make some mistakes here and there, but you still have to focus entirely on the combat situation you are involved in. What I'm doing on this screen is something that you cannot predict and plan beforehand. It's a thing you have to dynamically adjust thanks to the enemies that cover spaces and do varied overlapping attacks. Normally, you could easily approach the small propeller demons and kill them from below with simple melee attacks. But since the big guys are covering the ground, I'm using them as anchor points to sling Reto from small gaps to small gaps. Your spontaneous choices matter for your survival. Your small mistakes can snowball into catastrophe, and your small victories can lead to Zen-like flow state, and then eventual victory. This is what I value the most in an action game, something that breaks the mold of a predictable chain of events. After every enemy is defeated, you can see there's only a truck demon left. Even though he is a fairly dangerous dude with multiple attack patterns in his hand, here's what I do with him. Compared to the previous combat, it feels more static here, because this attack method works the best for this guy, and I'm just relying on it because it works. Unless you pull up the intrinsic motivation to style on the leftover enemies, downtime is inevitable. It is something I cannot fix, as is the universal rule that you have to kill every enemy in an arena to proceed, but with this example, I hope you understand the value of multiple enemies. So how did I design all the enemies? This is where I pull out my design method called Enemy Distribution Spectrum. Simply put, there's a spectrum between the arbitrarily defined fodder enemy and the tank enemy. And I conceptualized chess pieces based on the spectrum. The fodder enemy can be described like this. They die in a few hits. they can be played like a toy, like getting juggled, launched, exploded, etc. Most of them are grouped, so players have to consider using attacks that cover large areas, and they are the main resource providers. On the other hand, the tank enemy they don't die easily, has fewer reactions compared to the fodders, but there's an internal poise meter that can be drained steadily. They make the players move around with the space control aspect, and they have multiple patterns to provide different spacing games. The spectrum implies that there are several types of units in between, such as tanks that can be juggled or have many weaknesses, or fodders that have chunky poise to eat your attack and counter you. The most engaging balance of a combat scenario would be the 5 fodders to 2 tanks ratio, but it's not always the fixed rate. You can have only tanker enemies or only fodder enemies in an area, as long as they function as dynamic hazard that makes players engage. For every enemy type, I can add different traits such as can guard or hyper armor themselves, can do lasting AoE in the arena, can deal a contact damage, can spam the projectiles, can debuff you, can summon other enemies, and so on. There are going to be more different traits than just this list, but there's one trait I will avoid like a poison, hard counter trait. Basically, you have to use a specific tool to kill certain enemies and there's no other way. You may know them as colored enemies, rhythm game enemies, or Doom Eternal DLC enemies. God, I fucking hate this guy! There's an immediate upside to this design approach that players are forced to use different tools to get the job done. But once you play the game again for mastery, you realize there's no way to improve your method to deal with those kinds of enemies by approaching differently. It's a pure execution challenge with one solution at best, and unless that execution involves potential gameplay variants like this or this, it is shallow from the concept. I-1 enemies can be killed with every tool. Some tools are going to be more effective towards some enemies. For example, using the boomerang can juggle the small airborne enemies in one hit, but that shouldn't block the other lesser methods entirely. Each option's strengths and weaknesses should be explored by the players themselves. When the concept work is done, the next part is actualizing the enemies, and I follow 3 principles when I'm animating and programming them. 1. Every enemy should try to attack you constantly, but whip a lot too. A thing I want to make in this game is fighting a horde of enemies that never give you a turn, so you have to be extremely aggressive when there's a chance to fire back. So the general AI chart looks like this. Simply put, if the chasing part is done, the enemy will start the apt attack animation according to the player's position without a single second of delay. This AI chart does not apply to every enemy in this game, but you can see the direction of it. However, even though they attack constantly, they also make a lot of mistakes, and that's the good part. Every attack distance and angle always have a fixed amount of rate except for the obvious teleport attack. At first, this aspect was designed to balance out the rigid movement of Grotto, but the unintentional benefit is that if the player successfully dodges the first strike, there's gonna be a lot of opportunity to punish them back however the players want. The more you engage in this rodeo with the enemies, the faster you will internalize the predictable loop of the enemies, and you can play with them, bunch of them, thousands of them. 2. Every enemy should be easily readable. Some of you might roll your eyes and say, of course it should be readable, how else would it be? But here's the thing, even some of the greatest games just don't give a shit. Considering that my game will feature an extreme amount of enemy density, the player prediction should be easily calculated. This means players should be able to guess what the enemies are going to do in the next few seconds with just a glimpse of the animation frames. To achieve this, almost all patterns will have a startup animation longer than 0.5 seconds, and if it's gonna be shorter than that, there will be a contextual reason why that happens, like it being the combo extender that happens if the player is too close to them, or it being a ranged attack that happens only when the player is too far away from the opponent. Also, This is a minor detail, but the turning state should be properly animated no matter how short it is going to be. If there's one thing I don't like about the general trend of side-scrolling action games is that when they try to turn the character, they just flip the character in one frame and call it a day. The biggest problems are conceptual clashes and lack of information. In most action games, giant monstrosities have lengthy stage-shift interpolation, weighty action, and visually apparent telegraphs. Not only does it fit the concept, but it also delivers the information directly to the player about what can be expected from this certain challenge. They can be fast and aggressive if the designer intended it that way, but with all those small twitches and movements, players can use this information to predict what is going to happen next and prepare for the next move, which leads to a satisfying gameplay of utilizing the given information. Now imagine this kind of monster can change the direction right away in the chain of actions without any visual information. You can memorize the pattern chain if you brute force it, but you can't shake away the feeling that the developers took the convenient path for the easy difficulty point. Readability is a must, and I can emphasize enough. 3. Size shouldn't matter. If there's another thing I don't like about the general trend of side-scrolling action games is that even if the enemy seems like a giant monstrosity that should be able to guard the path, there's no collision in their body, so players just mindlessly roll behind them and constantly attack their back, because that would be the most optimal positioning. To fix this, for the horizontally large enemies, I simply added the collision that can't be penetrated with your dash movement. There's no magical trick to it. With those rules in mind, I have crafted 42 chess pieces so far. Some are more complex, some are more primitive, and some of them just don't function as a general piece that can be used everywhere. I still think none of them are as finely crafted and dynamic as ninja enemies from Ninja Gaiden, but the mixture of these enemies can pressure you into a lot of improvisational decision making, and each fight will always feel dynamic because of that. It's somewhat successful in my point of view. So far, you can see the upside of having a rule set when manufacturing the enemies. However, there's a special case where I had to do more than just following the rules and pushing the products to the conveyor belt. It is something more delicate, the chorus part of the song, the climax of a story. Time to ramble about boss fights. It is obvious from the video footages I've shown, I love boss fights in action games. No, not that one. That's even worse. God, I don't know why I love this game. Of course, there are some great action games in which you can't judge the quality purely by the boss fights, but at least for my game, I want bosses to be something to look forward, not the things you dread. It's hard to generalize the bosses I've made, as they all have different themes, purposes, and playstyles, but I can say the fundamental structure is almost the same. One of the biggest dilemmas of boss designs in combo action games is that despite the strengths of the main character being an unstoppable combo juggernaut, developers can't just allow players to do that, because that will make the boss fights, quote-unquote, the ultimate challenges, easily breakable. Combo fundamentalists would say that one-sided carnage should be allowed, but as a person who wanted to actualize epic bosses that can pressurize you by their sheer existence, I couldn't just implement the idea for every boss. There should be a back and forth, even if it can be arbitrary. My approach was simple. Remember the tank type enemies I mentioned before? Boss enemies are basically that, but on steroids. You can't dismiss them as Souls-like bosses, but I'll take that as a compliment because the well-made ones are pretty fucking awesome, and I have no shame about admitting that some of them were good influences for the boss design. They would have tons of signature moves that you had to memorize and properly counter. Most of them would have a big phase shift in the middle, so players have to take care of their own pacing. And for the giant-sized boss, I gave them extra amount of poise so that you have to work harder to stagger them. If the boss enemy has a humanoid figure, it can be juggled once the poise is broken, but aside from this one occasion, You can't just juggle forever because they can escape from it, or the other hazards will make you retreat from chaining the combo. Compared to the normal arena where you can mostly lead the freeform combat, boss fights in this game are designed in a specific way that you have to nail down constant whip punishes to lead the fight to victory. Even though it is hard to find a moment where you can push your combo with different methods, I still try to give more reasons to utilize the different player tools for each fight. Flucher the Train is the first proper test of mobility tools and repositioning attack. This guy is probably my favorite Act 1 boss because I like trains, but also it teaches you the fundamentals about the giant enemies coming later. He has a deadly charge attack that can repeatedly happen in a set amount of cooltime. You can utilize the timed double jump and dash move to dodge the attack, but to keep the combo meter on fire, you can also use the pogo attack or pull attack to hit the boss while dodging the charge attack. But you can't always position yourself above the train because he can smack you with his hard to react smoke style attack. And in the third phase, he starts summoning propeller demons which have contact damage. So when you are not dodging the charge attack, you have to attack him while facing his frontal side. This is where the repositioning attack shines. Since the chain of normal attack pushes you forward, there is a chance that you face tank him and die from the frontal attack patterns. However, by mixing the backstab attack, you can make a gap between you and him and easily run away when he shows the sign of the patterns. The more you play the game, you will realize that a jump normal attack can bounce you up as long as it hits the target. So you can also use that knowledge to push the aggression more while maintaining aerial mobility. Mix some ranged attacks here and there and it becomes an amazing speed kill sequence. It's a boss that can reflect your growth as a player while not being a complete joke, which is why I love to fight this boss again and again. Another example is Catalush the Mastermind, who is also my favorite giant boss. The foundation is similar to Blucher, but I try to emphasize the multiple hazards aspect instead of making a single target boss. As a default pattern, he places an automaton that shoots lightning when it gets close to the player, and in the second phase, he summons a handful of mechanical demons to support him. This looks overwhelming at first, but you can reasonably deal with them. The automaton will self-explode by simply making them fall down. What you need to do is smashing them with a heavy attack one time. Also, the mechanical demons are just the same mechanical demons you have fought for some time, so there will be no unexpected sucker punch as long as you deal with them quickly. The boss demon can give you a problem with the upscreen attack, but you can expect their actions via their subtle headlight, the signature grinder noise, and their primitive AI behavior. Of course, since Catalush himself is the main actor in this boss fight, I made a lot of different attack patterns that would make him stand out as a unique boss, especially in the third phase. Now, there are some common action game takes that grind my gears, and one of them is a boss fight should not summon additional enemies because that's cheap. But this kind of take undermines that different games are built upon different strengths and strategies. If we are talking about formulaic Souls-like games again, then it's an understandable point because the player movement and attack methods are mostly built around the single target and heavily committed actions. It would be painful to deal with multiple boss enemies more than just two at once. On the other hand, this is a 2D game that gave a destructive crowd control tool as a default. So the bosses, the ultimate challenges, should be able to test the aspect. Also, by providing normal goons to the boss fight, it can solve the issue of not being able to show the strengths of Gretel. You can mix the freeform combat in the whip punish focus fight, which ultimately adds dynamism to the stricter combat flow. And lastly, I'll talk about Io, a classic rival boss that functions as a bulky version of the player character. As much as I emphasized the multiple targets, I also wanted to make a well thought out 1v1 boss fight, where you have to focus on what they are doing and can't just easily cheese your way out. Since she is also a Reaper from the same sanctuary, Io has an iframe dash and jump, meaning that she can also dodge your attacks. Also, her attack chains work similarly to how the players whips their actions, so
you can't easily get near the boss until the chain ends with a finisher move. These attack chains get even lengthier on Reaper difficulty too. Now with all the explanation, this boss sounds really restricted and oppressive, but this is a boss fight where you can use the multi-directional charge attack and juggling to break the repetitive back and forth. Like this moment, where I could predict the landing point of Ayo, started the unlanding charge, and then punished her with the back direction attack. Or this moment where I closed the gap, broke her poise, and juggled right at the moment when she was chaining the attack. The easiest people that the mega humanoid bosses in action games can fall into is that the back and forth element can be way too rigid that it can turn into a semi-turn-based game. Thankfully, IO allows different rhythms when approaching the fight, so I'm proud of what I've crafted here. Now, I didn't analyze every single boss here, because some are just built as better examples than the others. And I didn't want to spoil other highlights for watchers who haven't tried this game yet. I can guarantee you that currently there are at the very least 4 better bosses that I haven't mentioned. I would say my way of designing bosses is exceptionally groundbreaking, but what I have made were some of the most memorable moments that players would like to revisit from time to time, whether it is for mastering the fight or getting a good score, now that we mentioned it.
The reason why I implement the ranking system is quite simple. While some people can intrinsically choose to master the combat system, most of the time, some visible milestones are needed to let people know that there's a higher plane of combat depth than the place they are standing. The existence of metrics alone can make players realize that there's stuff that can be explored further. It could be a better survival method or an optimization for your combat. Also, I just needed an excuse to implement these funny little details.
Damn, that was hard. Could have been better. But I tried. Being the best is not that far off from here. Almost got him. Should be perfect. If I had a bit of spice to it. Splendid! I'm impressed with myself.
To get the sweet triple S rank in a stage, you have to get the job done in a limited time, maintain a high style meter while dealing with almost all enemies in the level, and never die once. These requirements seem harsh, but I balance the score to be approachable by everyone who gives a reasonable amount of effort. After all, every stage's score threshold is balanced around my playtesting, and I try to play with no heavy optimization or speedrun strat in mind.
Let's start with the time limit aspect first. The existence of a time limit can be scary for a lot of players, but here's a trick. If you understand the routing and remember all the locations of every arena of the level, you will see that the time limit thresholds are very lenient. You don't have to play a game with a speedrunner mindset when you are going for the triple S rank. With this in mind, you may think it is not worthy of having its own category on the scoreboard because it is so easy to achieve, but it exists for a reason. When you look at the combat in this game, you can see that the merit of learning the on-landing charge attack, juggling combo, healing grenade usage, and the ranged attack combos are all for efficiency's sake. It is good to utilize all the tools available for survivability and DPS. However, some players will just stick to the basic tools and dodge options to deal with every situation, whether it is because of their volition or their ignorance. This playstyle can be interesting as a challenge run, but I wanted to nudge the general audiences to experiment with more combat options so that they wouldn't waste their time by using the suboptimal method. The time limit's existence alone might not be able to pressure players to optimize their run right away, but it can certainly help, as a silence presence behind the player's back. Also, you have to keep in mind that the time limit is only lenient in the race difficulty or below. Reaper difficulty tests your combat optimizations to the maximum degree, with the increased number of enemies, more frequent enemy mix-ups, hidden arenas, and the decreased resource gain rate. You have to play efficiently or they will kill you first. That's the gist of Reaper difficulty. And fitting to this, the time limits are generally tuned up to be tight. Now it is serving as an actual test category instead of just being a silent pressure. Compared to that, the KO score category is more honest about what it wants you to do. knock down every enemy in the level while maintaining the high combo momentum. This part of the scoring system is influenced by older Dooms, which shows the percentage of the enemies you killed at the end of the stage, and the old PS2 Lord of the Ring games where you have to kill an enemy at the high combo meter to get the better score. Note that you must kill the enemies to get the designated score instead of just hitting them. This means that you should try to maintain your combo meter as high as possible consistently until the enemies die off. Maintaining the combo meter works similar to other conversion games like DMC. Constantly pushing the attack while not getting hit will give you a higher grade. Mixing different skills will give you a boost, but getting a hit will degrade it. The difference between mine and DMC would be that mine is much more lenient in terms of giving players a boost or penalty, mainly because in my game getting hit is inevitable. Of course, you have to minimize the damage, but tanking is also encouraged for your long-term survival. It isn't designed like DMC or Bayonetta, where getting a single hit is a sign of being a filthy casual plebeian who doesn't deserve to wield a controller! Sorry, I'm just being salty about getting a stone award for every mission in Bayonetta. Now here's a confession I want to make. I kinda regret making the combo meter as a style meter. Sure, it's functional as a part of the scoring system, but compared to later DMC, Bayonetta, or Ultra Kill, the internal rule is pretty basic and doesn't really translate the player's combo skill into a gradable ladder. You can use the same moves over and over, and S rank is easily obtainable if you don't get hit on your way. I think it's more apt to call it a fever meter, since it is more about constantly being aggressive, not about how good at styling the enemies. It is reasonable that players who expected a proper style meter from the game would feel disappointed by it, but I think the development has gone too far to roll back decision. Hopefully I won't make a similar mistake when I make future games. However, there's a thing I would like to add about the style meter. One thing I liked about how I implement this system is that other than being a motivation for high scores, it can also benefit your combat optimization. So there are more reasons to chase for the highest style rank. And let's look at the necklace pieces for a second. You may think the S rank requirement make all those necklace pieces less optimal than the others, but I highly recommend trying them. It's something that you have to play to feel the different flow in your combat move. Other than the style meter, there is also another metric that checks your combat ability in real time, the combo number. Simply put, this is the number that goes up with each individual hit without getting damaged. This looks pretty meaningless when there is already a style meter, but it exists for two reasons. The first one is, similar to the style meter, there are corresponding necklace pieces that activate with the combo number. Getting a single hit will reset the number to 0, so there's a higher stake to activate the necklace, unlike the ones that require only S ranks. This makes you more cautious about combining the necklaces because while it can make you an unstoppable killing machine at the right flow, for most people, it's hard to even get near to that flow because of the high requirements. For example, these two necklaces will boost the melee damage to 1.5 times when both are activated, but you need to mine these things to activate them. The second reason for the combo number's existence is for the boss fights. The style meter scoring method is built that way to encourage snowballing, where you have to mow down a bunch of enemies at once when your style meter is high. However, the bosses are mostly single targets, most of them have significantly larger health pools, and will only count as one if you beat them. This means there will be a lot of occasions that the scoring won't reflect the player's skills that much. Like, if you were mostly maintaining the S rank but then fumbled at the last moment and lost the style point to 0, you get the D rank at the end. A mistake is a mistake, but it doesn't reflect that the player was doing well early on. This is where the best combo number bonus shines because it adds a nice little bonus to the style ranking. If the player was doing great before, then naturally, players would also have a higher best combo number as a result. This combined scoring method works wonderfully in the boss fight and make the high score run aspect less frustrating. It is easy to judge minuscule elements like this as meaningless or tacked on, but hopefully you can understand what I was going for with this. I am always trying to implement systems that are integral to the main gameplay, not clutter that diverts your focus. You know what happens when you get diverted in combat? You die, and that's the third thing players should consider on the scoreboard. Well, there is an in-game checkpoint system that forces you to make internal decision making on your first playthrough. The ideal playthrough requires no death. At first, I wasn't sure if it was the right choice to force the no death run for the best score, considering that the game allowed a lot of mistakes in the players department. But in the end, I decided to stick with the idea that no death is the intended high-level experience. I want to talk about Ultra Kill again. Out of all the rank chasing games I played, Ultra Kill's P-Rank run was by far my favorite so far, even though this game punishes you for dying even once. What I liked was that there were lots of opportunities to flip the table even if the run didn't look favorable to me. You can end the combat arena with 1 HP left, but there's still a reasonable amount of chance to survive the next encounter, thanks to how the healing works in this game. Mind you, Ultra Kill is also a brutal game when it decided to crank up the difficulty, but the bounce back opportunities made me trust myself and go for the full run even if I made some mistakes early on. What doesn't kill me can make me stronger is applicable here in a physical manner. And I wanted to capture the feeling when the player goes for the triple S run. Thankfully, I didn't have to do additional work to capture the feeling. The healing bomb mechanic itself is a great way to ensure your confidence throughout the run. But there are also giant healing scenarios hidden in the corners which reward you for remembering the level geometry. Also, even though the concept of restarting points isn't necessary when you go for the triple S rank, you still can use the checkpoint snails as a focus regain or a healing purpose. Once again, a mechanic with multiple purposes. I love that so much. If I have to spoil the upcoming content, the highest difficulty mode that isn't unlocked yet will completely remove the continue function in a level. This means the no death run is mandatory if you're going for the truest ultimate developer intended challenge. This can look scary right now and is understandable. After all, there will be more modifications to make the challenge even harsher. But hopefully you can understand this is what I want the players to go for in the end. A 10 to 30 minutes of struggle for survival, improvised combat jazz, and a player-driven narrative that you can proudly tell your kids. My game making process was closer to jamming improvised jazz music than writing structurally coherent classical music. It started as a vague chord progression, and as the development went on, more and more instruments with weird melody lines got attached to it, and then it turned into a wonderful walls of sound that you can vibe with it. Incidentally, this jazz analogy can be applied to the combat flow of this game, where your convoluted mess of character makes friction with an even more incomprehensible mess of enemies, and you have to continue a lengthy improvised gig until the show is over. Whether it's going to be a noisy mess or a delightful wall of sound is heavily dependent on your play skill, but hey, you can't play a John Coltrane song just by blowing a saxophone with your asshole. The reason why I put up the jazz analogy is because I wanted to say the game development procedure can be approached fluidly. If I had stuck in that compulsive conceptual consistency and couldn't escape from it, I might have not arrived at this level right now. I would say this monster of a video game is something I didn't expect to build in the early days. I can assume it's a fruit of happy accidents, but I also think happy accidents only happen if you are more open about utilizing other games' merits. If you think some other game elements can work well on yours, then feel no shame about putting it in your game. Just add your own twist on it if it is necessary, and make sure they sound coherent together when you play the instrument tracks all at once. Of course, some fundamentals, the chord, should be built from the start and stand as a guiding light whenever the development feels like getting nowhere. My guiding light was dynamism, improvisation, and the feeling of conquering chaos, and all the external elements and internal elements are built around those three pillars. Hopefully you didn't die from cringe, because that was pretty cringe even for my standard. And so you have seen almost everything about my thought process that went into the development of Magenta Horizon. The game is technically not finished yet, but I've arrived at the 80% mark of the whole development, and there's no need to add more to the core of this game. So all I have to do is an arms race that can end the game on a satisfying note. Currently, it is getting sold as an unfinished status, but I'm proud of what I've done so far, so I wouldn't mind about the early visitors. If you have watched it this far but still haven't played the game yet, well, if you don't mind trying early access games, why don't you try it out? This might be your kind of jam.